So Proverbs chapter 1, let's read together if you've got it there. The Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel. Perhaps I can say right at the beginning that it's possible that Solomon didn't write all of these Proverbs. Many scholars feel that these Proverbs could have been written in line with or like in accordance with the wisdom of Solomon. So conservatives would say Solomon wrote these Proverbs. More liberal people would say they were written after the time of Solomon, maybe hundreds of years later. If Solomon lives at about 950 to 1000 BC, the Proverbs could have been written 500 to 700 years later, many scholars would say, and others would say we can't work out who is the author. So there are different scholarly views. I would say that in an assignment, it's often good to show awareness of 2 or 3 or 4 different scholarly views. So you could write down conservative scholars believe and quote 2 or 3, and you could write down other scholars think, and then you could quote some of the other scholarly views on date and place and culture as well. Next, verse 2, to gain wisdom and instruction and for understanding words of insight. So one of the things that happens when you read the Proverbs is that you get wisdom and instruction. And then to give prudence to those who are simple, knowledge and discretion, and let the wise listen and add to their guidance and understanding. For understanding proverbs and parables, sayings and riddles of the wise. So this is Proverbs 1. Can I get everyone now to have a bit of an attempt at writing a proverb? Can I get you to think of one thing in life that's sort of wise, useful? And can I get you to write that down? What would be a useful proverb? So everyone, an exercise. Write a proverb. So a lot of the Proverbs really begin with chapter 10. And so in Proverbs 10, we have, after the 9-chapter introduction, a wise son brings joy to his father, but a foolish son brings grief to his mother. So there's a contrast there. So we've got parallelisms, and parallelisms can be antithetical, that is different to one another. They can build on one another, or they can be synthetic and develop ideas further. Notice in chapter 10, verse 2, ill-gotten treasures, no lasting value. Righteousness delivers from death. So if you do the wrong thing, you get caught out. But if you do the right thing, then life will be good. So the challenge we're saying is, what's a proverb that you could write? And I guess thinking about it myself, if you work hard, you will eventually succeed. So that's probably something that I think. Thoughts? What's a proverb? Yep.
If you someone gossips with you, you're going to gossip behind your back.
Yeah. That's why you should never leave a group who are talking, because you know the moment when you leave, then they can talk about you. So stay forever, and then they won't be able to gossip. So yeah, gossip. So there's, and I think you'll find quite a lot of proverbs are about the gossip sort of question. Yep. Thoughts? Yeah. If you were to write a proverb, yep. Thoughts? Yeah. Yeah. So that's a good one, isn't it? Worrying means you suffer twice. So you can make proverbs up about anything that leads to success, and then you can make proverbs up about warning. So we've got success, and then we've got warning. And when it comes to success, you can make proverbs up about study and work. My father used to tell me that 1 year of study is worth yeah, so you reckon something about how it'll always add, $10,000 to your salary or something like that with this thing. So he encouraged me to do extra study. So there can be proverbs of affirmation, which talk about success and work and what you must do. And then there can be proverbs of warning, such as gossip and worry. Yeah, I like that. Matthew, can you tell us a proverb if you had to make a proverb?
A frugal person never shops for groceries on an empty stomach.
A frugal person never shops for groceries on an empty stomach. And there's a lot of proverbs about finance. And so this one sort of fits with those financial ones. The proverbs are probably mostly about 8 or 10 different themes. And I think an interesting exercise would be to gather the themes of the proverbs together. One of the interesting questions is Proverbs generally just general wisdom, or is Proverbs about virtues? So has anyone here studied virtue ethics? Yep. So Abby, what can you tell us about virtue ethics? Yep. 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 So an ordered soul, you said everything in place, and then the virtues are, and there's a list of 6 or 8 virtues out there. Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we've got 9 of them there, such as wisdom, and that's what we're talking about here, doing the right thing at the right time, so timing, prudence, justice, fortitude, and we'd talk about patience, courage, liberality, generosity, magnificence. We could talk about beauty, magnanimity, temperance, self-control. So that's some of them there. Others list 12 virtues. So courage, bravery, temperance, moderation, liberality, giving freely, generosity, charisma, ambition. So there's a positive ambition and a negative ambition. And this is true of all the proverbs, is that there's positives and negatives in all of these proverbs. Now, there's some difficulties and positives in the proverbs, and you'll find these listed in Fee and Stewart, How to Read the Bible for All It's Worth. And they say here, you need to understand the nature of wisdom. So the nature of wisdom is what generally you do the good thing, generally good things will happen, but not every time. So if you get up early, then generally you'll have more time in the day. But sometimes you get up early, you start chatting to the next door neighbour, and you discover you got much less time in the day. So the opposite can be true. Proverbs don't always work. The early bird doesn't always catch the worm. Sometimes gets distracted talking to the neighbour. There is a whole page here on abuse of the wisdom literature. And so many people will misquote wisdom passages. Now, the one that's often misquoted is trust in the Lord and then you'll prosper. But is that always the case if you trust in the Lord? Will you always get HDs for every assignment? And there's other factors at work, aren't there? But on the whole, if you trust God and honour God, on the whole, 80% of the time you'll do well. And so the Proverbs is about what will generally happen. Another passage is Ecclesiastes chapter 3. There's a time to be born and a time to die. Now, when you read that, what springs to mind? A time to be born, time to die. To my mind, I could start a project, and this is the time to do it. To my mind, I could stop a project and close it down. There's a time. Now, that proverb is not actually speaking to Sam, start a project. However, God, I think, by His Spirit could use that and speak to me. But there's two things going on there. We have to be careful that we don't just lean on the Bible passage and say, the Bible passage guarantees if I start this project, it'll work out well. No, the Bible passage says there's a time for things to begin, there's a time for things to die, and mainly it's talking about people. But in application to my life, sometimes there is a time for things to begin and die. So it's a bit more complex than just reading the Bible passage. Then there's a description of the different Bible passages, and then there's quite a discussion of abuse of Proverbs. So Proverbs don't mean it'll all work out well. And the major one is Proverbs 16:3, commit your way to the Lord and all your plans will succeed. Yes, God will work in all of them, but not everything will succeed. All right. Matthew, can you think why Proverbs don't always just work magically? We read them, we follow them, and we don't always succeed. Why is it sometimes different to what we read, Matthew?
I think life's far too complex. There's way too many variables in play for a one-size-fits-all type of approach.
Yes, exactly. So let's have a look now at Matthew, at Proverbs chapter 8, and this is the one that we've got the assignment on. And then back to Proverbs 1, if you want to look at an interlinear, you just type in Proverbs interlinear and you can look up the meaning of the Hebrew words. And at the bottom of each word, it gives the passing and the structure of the word in that sentence. So that's available if you want to look at that. So Proverbs chapter 8. So looking at Proverbs chapter 8, does wisdom call out, does not understanding raise her voice? I don't think that's true. I don't think if you step outside this door, you'll hear, study hard and you will do well. I mean, I don't think wisdom actually does call out. So it's not literally true. But what stirs deep within when you read that passage, Proverbs 8, does not wisdom cry out? Yeah. Any thoughts? I think what it reminds me of is that thoughts come into your mind, don't they? That wisdom cries out in my mind, an idea comes in my mind, a thought comes into my mind, and it raises its voice. When I see that extra piece of chocolate cake, then wisdom cries out, don't go there. No one's prayed over it and cast out the calories yet. So
I think are we listening is also a question raised there.
Exactly. The listening side of it, very important. So then we've got verse 6, listen, I open my lips to speak. So the thought there, as Matthew has raised, is that wisdom is ready to speak. And verse 10, choose my instruction instead of silver, knowledge instead of gold. So wisdom can be more valuable than gold and silver. Verse 15, by me kings reign and rulers will rule. So you'll do well. Whatever position or job you have, you'll do well if you have wisdom. One of the things that we need to be balanced here is that we all have a little bit of wisdom and we all have a little bit of folly, I think. And one of the things I think that Proverbs is encouraging us is to have a lot more wisdom and a lot less folly. For that reason, Proverbs is encouraging us to grow spiritually. And so it's formational, it's transformational. And so it's about the formation and the transformation that takes place in our lives as we read. There's an article here that I was able to just read the beginning of on formation and transformation. And even at one of the schools of theology, they had an article on formation and transformation through the Proverbs, how they bring change. So again, I think it's important for us to recognize that the Proverbs aren't just quick solutions. They're about the change that's needed in your life and my life as we are transformed. Chapter 8, verse 22, the Lord brought me forth wisdom as the first of his works before his deeds of old. Can I get everyone to write down what do you think is meant by Proverbs 8:22, the Lord brought me forth, wisdom forth, as the first of his works. Verse 23, I was formed long ago at the very beginning. When there were no watery depths, I was given birth. Before the mountains were settled, I was given birth. So any thoughts? Anyone here? Yep.
I think it's saying that God is the first person that actually created him. All his acts of life. So he started creating that's wisdom.
Yeah, I really like that. I think that's very sound in that you're suggesting that as God speaks, then his first actions, wisdom is present there at the very, very beginning. So I really like that. I think that's excellent. Another thought, so we've got 5 or 6 students here and then 1 or 2 other students. So we could have 7 or 8 different views. Yeah.
We also have, as wisdom, saw the whole creation process.
Yeah.
It knows how the world is laid out. It has the knowledge of how things are meant to be in the
Yeah, and I think there's an encouragement of the value of order, the value of structure, all of those, and they're likely to be present with God as he unfolds things. It's a bit Platonic, isn't it? It fits with the Platonic idea of order. Do you see a connection there with Plato's ideas? Other thoughts as to what anyone else sees here? What about Matthew? What are your thoughts on the Lord brought me forth as the first of his works before the deeds of old?
I'm just thinking in terms of cause and effect, wisdom precedes creation.
Yeah. Yes, I love that. So wisdom precedes creation. And one of the interesting things is that there is a group that read the Lord brought me forth as old from Proverbs 8, as this is when God made Jesus. But before you rush in and accept that, then I think this is the Jehovah's Witness group who hold this view. And so they're reading more into this than we would accept. So just put that out there as an example of someone reading a passage and then finding something that's not necessarily there. Now, one of the difficulties is that this would then mean that there was no wisdom before Jesus was created. And so that would mean God would have no wisdom. Yes. So there's a logical problem in that reading of the passage there. So I think almost all Christians and scholars would not accept that as God making wisdom. Wisdom has to be part of who God is at the very beginning. And this is where I do quite like Plato's insights, in that Plato would say there's a huge amount of beauty and order out in the world, and that speaks to us that the architect behind all things, beauty and order. And so I think there's a lot of value in that.
I feel like it's a really strange way to put it, like
Yeah.
a concept of bringing wisdom.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like it's still talking about it using like this metaphor that, you know, like that wisdom is its own kind of, but almost like, you know, it describes wisdom as this woman who's this very, you know,
Yes.
it could almost be like this goddess figure, kind of like a,
Yes.
like this separate person or
Yes.
thing, you know, but, you know, I think it's just the same as truth, you know, like, can you bring truth into being? No, it was just always there whether you acknowledge it or not.
Exactly. And this connects with the idea of the Trinity, of course, is that the Trinity in one sense is always there. And that is, you don't bring the Holy Spirit or the Son of God into being. They're part of what was always there. Yeah, so a fascinating passage in Proverbs 8. It's got some fascinating verses in them. And you could well have a look at those further. Let's go now to the last chapter, and I think it's 31. And so here we have the wife of noble character. Her husband has full confidence in her. She brings forth good, not harm, selects the wool and flax like the merchant ships. And so there's finishes with verse 31. Honour her for all she has done. Let her works bring praise at the city gate. So this could be certainly about the wife of noble character, but it can also be more general as well. So that's the Proverbs. So I encourage you to have a look at Proverbs 8 and to have a look at Proverbs more fully. So let me go back to some notes on Proverbs. Firstly, the key ideas. Wisdom is often drawn from observation of nature. That is you'll see many examples. That is, go to the ant, you sluggard, and you see that ants work, and then you're reminded that we should work. So wisdom is often beyond thinking. It includes ethics and action and instinct and heart attitudes and habits. And it's part of the formational and transformational process. It's not quick, simple solutions that you can carry in a book. That is, as you read the Proverbs, you need to allow the Proverbs and the work of God and the Spirit of God to transform you and change you. Again, the writing of Paul Ricoeur on metaphor and figurative text can be very useful for us and help us to understand the Proverbs. It can remind us that the Proverbs are objective. That is, if you do these things, then good will come. If you do foolish things, troubles will often come, not always, but in general. And then it reminds us that there are subjective decisions you have to make about what you do and think. Willard says that spiritual formation is taking place all the time. It's inevitable. That is, you're becoming better people, thinking in better ways, and you'll have weak moments, or you're becoming worse people, thinking in worse ways, though you'll sometimes have better moments. So Willard and others say that our modern world is part of a crisis. and it's found in our world and professions. And this could be a good quote if you did something on Proverbs. That is, they say that up until about 1800, 1750 or 1850, people accepted that wisdom was part of what we all did. However, in the modern world, we now measure everything and we now organise everything, but we no longer put as much emphasis on character and wisdom. So what do you think? Is Willard right? Do we live in a time that's all about individualism, expressionism, manufacture, goods, work, lots of hours, but not so much about character and wisdom that you find in perhaps native peoples who've got more of an emphasis on that? Any thoughts? Want to put forward an argument for that?
It is pretty much superficial and shallow.
Yeah.
Because of social media.
Yep.
It's kind of really like picture of life and people.
Yep. Yeah, and sociologists have wrestled with this, and the people often lived in villages, and you might work as a farmer or a baker, but you're interacting with everyone in that community of 500 people or so, and character was seen as important. That when you went to get married, people would say, is this person a person of character or not? Whereas today we often live as isolated individuals, and we work and we entertain ourselves and all of that. We don't seem to have that culture that was there 300, 400 years ago. Your thoughts? Is it true, or has Willard missed it when he says?
I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
For understanding the world, wisdom, humanity, children, the power of imagination. I think today, I think because the relationship is not long. In the format of the imagination, in the same moment, but I think we have nice thoughts.
Any thoughts which years the Romantic period went from and to?
I'd say it starts with Rousseau.
Yeah.
And then as kind of personal narratives come in, I think that's because the transcendentalist was the norm, but
Yeah. And as you say, it seems to die away, and then maybe the Enlightenment industrial period then really takes off, particularly the 1800s with steam engines, and industrialization really pushes forward very strongly. And then I guess every decade there's a change, but every century there can be changes. So it's an interesting thought that some of the wisdom that's described in Proverbs has been lost. And one of the problems, I think, people read Proverbs with modern eyes, and they say, if you follow these 6 points, speak well, don't do evil, then nice things will happen. And so I think there is a danger in reading Proverbs with modern eyes. Whereas if you read Proverbs with more romanticized eyes or transcendental eyes or transformational eyes, you may come to a different understanding of Proverbs as transformational literature rather than quick answers. And it would be interesting to compare preaching, because I think quite a lot of preaching can be based on Proverbs. That is, if you do these 6 things, you'll be blessed and successful. So do you think that's true of preaching? Does preaching sometimes give a modernised view? I think fortunately, hopefully, we sing some nice transformational songs and we have some transformational preaching. But any thoughts on the preaching world?
I think it's really easy to get caught in one or the other. Pictures you come across of people waiting to know, but then others the way you think is really focused. I'm very important in both that.
Yeah. And the Hour of Power was all about positive message and you can succeed, and yet you've got others. I read an article on the weekend that was all about we live in a sin-destroyed world, and you do get those 2 different types of preaching. Yeah.
I think it's better to fall into, what's it called? Prosperity gospel.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think prosperity can be useful, but the trouble is it's often oversimplified. That is, if you look in the mirror and say, you'll be successful today, then you'll succeed. It doesn't think about you've got to study, you've got to choose the right courses. And yes, distinction there. Yeah. Yeah, and the transformation that comes with the Saviour, and also the need for hard work and wisdom. And I think the Proverbs really is introducing us to a lot of the wisdom steps. So I think sociologists would say one of the surest roads to success is education. So if you get a tertiary education, a bachelor, often that'll help you to be more successful. Whereas the prosperity gospel would sometimes say, as we conclude today, remember, if you believe it, you can accomplish it. So that could be, the message. Whereas if you look at the sociological evidence, it would say, if you sign up for some courses and training, then that'll probably help you on the journey. Yeah.
The prosperity gospel is separated from Christianity.
Yes. 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 Wow. Yeah. Yeah.
It's all about humans, not God. Human-centric. It's like God's only aim. Everything will get to the they're not even that for us. Savior is already as is. You just need to harness what already is within you.
Yeah, sounds good. Other students, thoughts on prosperity gospel and its strengths and limitations, and using Proverbs as part of the prosperity gospel? Yeah. 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 Yeah.
We don't want it at all. No one wants to face up to the reality that's coming to them, like, why is it that bad things happen to other people? Yeah. Something super catastrophic, like I have friends who've lost parents,
Yes.
I have both mine,
Yes.
know what I mean? Like people who get in accidents and all sorts of things. And like I think there's like a nicer balance that can be achieved, but I don't know, I think with prosperity is often, when something bad does happen to you, as I always seem to, you know, it'll leave you with only two options, you know, the, like, you know, like what Joey had to do with is he the one with the problem? You didn't have enough faith, you didn't believe enough well enough? Or is it God who is unjust and even though he was, you know, he did it wrong, you know? And I think just having those two options is not a multi-dimensional or wide way to look at it.
Yeah. So often Proverbs has a pragmatic, practical step emphasis to success, and this often falls into the prosperity gospel. And so if we just take a chapter like Proverbs 22, so a good name more desired than riches, so that's true. Rich and poor, the Lord is the maker of all. The prudent sees danger and takes refuge. So we could do a sermon on look out for the dangers and get ready financially, get ready, etc. Humility. But some would say these aren't just practical prosperity steps. This is actually formational. This should challenge you to realize, hey, I need to change so that I become more humble. And so Proverbs can be read through these different perspectives. One is prosperity gospel, and then the other is transformational. There's a change needs to take place. So Proverbs does read either like a list of prosperity secrets to success, but scholars say that's not the way to read it. Proverbs, they say, is a bit like a book for education in character that you read and it reminds you of the ways you should be transformed and changed. Now, interestingly, Proverbs speaks of wisdom being like a woman. So you follow this woman, etc., who's going to make you wise. But it also speaks of wisdom being like a getting away from the woman who can lead you astray. So let's see if we can find wisdom like a woman is one of the passages in Proverbs. So Proverbs 6:17, I think, is one of the passages. So Proverbs 6, particularly verse 17. And so there's a few passages that treat wisdom. So here you've got the warning, don't forsake your mother's teaching. And then it has here this command, and then do not lust in your heart over the beauty of a person. A prostitute can have you for a loaf of bread, and so on. So there's warnings against foolishness being like a lady, and yet there is hope and wisdom there. So Proverbs. So let's have a look at so I'll stop the computer and then start it again now. So let me stop